Hello everyone, welcome to Frightful Whispers. I'm here to guide you into the shadows tonight. I know you're using this video to unwind and drift off to sleep. So, before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the whispers of the night take over. It was supposed to be the perfect start. A fresh chapter in our lives. A new home, a new life with our little girl, Emily. We had just moved in, and as I stood there, holding a box in my hands, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The house looked perfect from the outside, nestled at the end of a quiet street with the last bits of sunlight casting long shadows on the freshly painted walls. It smelled like newness. Wood, paint, clean linen, and that should have made me feel at ease, but instead, there was this strange, lingering feeling. Something off. I turned to Matt, who was unloading boxes from the van, his face set in that usual calm expression. He was always the steady one, always in control. But tonight, I could sense something in him. There was an unease that I couldn't place, like he was carrying something heavy behind his eyes. He wasn't saying it, but I could tell. It was there, in the way he moved, in the way he looked at the house, like it was more than just a house to him. "Feels perfect, doesn't it?" I said, trying to break the silence, trying to make it feel like it was exactly what we had dreamed of. Matt didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just kept working, stacking boxes carefully in the living room, like everything needed to be exactly right. But I saw it. The slight tension in his shoulders, the furrow in his brow as he looked at the house, then at the boxes, then at the house again. His mind was somewhere else. I couldn't quite figure out where, but it wasn't here with me. "It's beautiful," he finally said, but the words felt rehearsed. "Just needs a little work." His voice was calm, but it didn't match his eyes. I felt it then, the ripple of doubt like a shadow stretching just a little too far. Was it the house that bothered him, or something else? "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice soft as I approached him. I could feel the weight of whatever it was sitting between us, but I didn't know how to ask the right questions. The unease in the air had been building all afternoon. Matt paused, looked at me for a long moment, then smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It wasn't the smile I was used to, the one that told me everything was all right. No, this one felt like he was trying to convince himself that everything was fine. "Yeah, just tired, I guess. It's been a long day." I nodded, not pushing him. Maybe he just needed some time to adjust. The move had been stressful after all, but something about this place, about this house, it felt strange, as if it was watching us, waiting. We went inside, stepping through the front door. The air was cool, and the house greeted us with its silence. It was the kind of quiet that made you listen harder, like the walls were listening too. I tried to shake the feeling, reminding myself that this was a fresh start. But the house didn't feel like a fresh start. It felt like a waiting room, a place that existed in between moments, as if it wasn't quite alive yet. Like it was waiting for us to wake it up, or for something to wake it up. We carried the boxes inside, arranging them where they needed to go. Each step we took in the house seemed to echo a little louder than the last. The silence wasn't comforting. It felt oppressive, like it was slowly suffocating the room. I glanced around, noticing the way the walls seemed to bend with the light, the way the floors creaked just a little too much. I caught myself looking at the baby monitor that was plugged in beside Emily's crib, wondering if it was too early to feel this unsettled. But as I glanced at it, there was something about the way it stood there on the nightstand, just sitting there, waiting. I turned to Matt, who was adjusting some furniture in the living room. "Let's put Emily to bed, and then maybe we can relax for a bit. Once we get everything unpacked, we can settle in." Matt didn't say anything right away. He just nodded, his eyes flicking to the nursery, his expression unreadable. We moved into the room together, Emily still sleeping soundly in her crib. I bent over the crib, my fingers brushing the soft blanket, and for a moment I felt a wave of warmth. This was supposed to be everything we'd ever wanted. But then, as I was about to leave, I hesitated. The monitor. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I looked at it for just a moment too long, my fingers grazing the edge of the device. It was just a monitor. It was supposed to be a safety net, a comfort. But the way it sat there in the darkness, watching us, it almost felt like it was watching me. I shook the thought away, reminding myself that I was just tired. "I'll check the monitor," Matt said, walking over to it and turning it on. The soft green light blinked to life, reassuring and ordinary. I nodded, trying to push the unease back down. "Okay, let's go to bed. We'll be fine. We're home." But as I turned to leave, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the house pressing in around us. Every room felt too still. Every corner felt like it was waiting for something. Waiting for us. We turned off the lights, the hallway growing darker as we stepped into our bedroom. The house settled. And as I lay there in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't just silent. It was listening. I rolled over, staring at the baby monitor, its small blinking green light casting an eerie glow in the corner of the room. And then I realized, with a sudden jolt of unease, that I had left something behind. Something was watching us. Watching me. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the feeling. But I knew then, deep in my gut, that this house wasn't just our new beginning. It was something else. Something waiting. It's hard to explain the way things felt that night. You know that feeling when everything is too quiet? It's like the world has hit pause, and you're stuck in some weird in-between space where nothing feels quite real. That's how it was. The house was eerily still. No creaks in the floorboards, no hum of the fridge. Just silence. The kind that made your ears ring. The kind that made me feel like I wasn't alone. But I wasn't sure if anyone else was there either. Matt had already drifted off beside me, breathing slow and steady. He's the calm one, the one who always seems to have everything under control. But that night I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the house. Maybe it was just me. But it didn't feel like a fresh start. It felt like a trap. I tried to push it out of my head. Emily was in her crib, sleeping soundly, and for a second, I just wanted to enjoy that peace. I turned over, staring at the ceiling, my fingers mindlessly tracing the edge of the blanket. But then I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the monitor picking up some kind of interference. You know how sometimes old electronics make weird noises? A buzz, a crackle? But this was different. It was soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. Emily. My heart stopped. For a second, I wasn't sure I'd heard it right. Maybe I'd imagined it, right? A trick of the mind. But then it came again, and this time, there was no mistaking it. Emily. I shot upright, my breath caught in my throat. The voice wasn't Matt's, it wasn't any noise from outside. It was clear, coming from the baby monitor, and I swear to God it was calling her name. Her name. The one we'd picked out for her. The name that meant everything to us. Emily. I glanced at Matt, still asleep, completely unaware. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Static, some glitch. But the voice, It felt so real, like it was right there in the room with me. I got out of bed, my body moving without thinking. I knew I had to check on Emily. I just had to. I couldn't leave it like this, like something was in the house, speaking to my child. I moved through the hall, the silence wrapping around me like a thick fog, and when I pushed the door open, there she was. Emily, still asleep in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling in the most peaceful way. She looked like an angel, completely unaware of the nightmare creeping through the walls. But something wasn't right. I could feel it in my gut, that nagging sense that something was out of place. The voice had stopped, but the air felt heavier, charged. I stood there, watching her for a moment, but then it came again. This time, it wasn't just her name. It's coming for her. My blood ran cold, I couldn't breathe. I spun around, staring at the baby monitor, hoping, praying that this was just a malfunction. But no, there it was, the steady green light blinking, the static growing louder, almost as if the monitor itself was alive. I couldn't take my eyes off it, the way the sound twisted, like someone or something was whispering right through it, right into my soul. She doesn't know what's coming, not yet, but she will. I backed up, stumbling toward the door, the air thick with an invisible pressure that made my skin crawl. My breath was shallow, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. The monitor, there was no mistake now, it was talking. It was talking to us. Talking to our baby, to Emily. I rushed back to our room, my legs shaking with every step. I don't know what I was thinking, if I even thought at all. I just needed to get back to Matt, needed to make sense of this to somehow feel safe again. I couldn't explain what had happened, but I knew one thing for sure. Something was wrong. Something was in this house. I climbed back into bed beside him, trying not to wake him. I didn't want to tell him. I didn't know how to tell him. How do you say, our baby monitor is speaking to us? How do you explain something like that? Matt stirred, turning toward me. What's wrong? His voice was thick with sleep, his eyes barely open. I wanted to tell him, wanted to shout about what I'd just heard, but the words wouldn't come. What could I even say? That I was hearing voices through the monitor? That something was watching us? Nothing, I said, my voice trembling despite myself. It's nothing. But it wasn't nothing, it was something. I lay there, wide awake, listening to the soft hum of the monitor, the quiet static filling the room. It was almost as if the voices were waiting for the next time I would hear them. The whispers didn't stop, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still talking, still watching, waiting for Emily to wake up and listen. I thought I was going crazy, but deep down, I knew. This house wasn't just old, it wasn't just creaky. It was alive, and it was waiting for us, for me. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the whispers were just getting started. I don't know when it started to feel different, but it did. The first few days after we moved in, I thought I was just imagining things. You know, a new house, new sounds, everything seemed to be a little off. But as the nights went on, the whispers didn't stop. They got louder, more insistent, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. Every night I would lie in bed, my eyes wide open in the dark, listening to the steady hum of the baby monitor beside me. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, the weird electrical noises that came with old wiring. But deep down, I knew. It was something else. It always started the same way. A faint crackle, barely noticeable, like static on a radio. I thought it was nothing, maybe just a glitch. But then came the voice. So soft at first, like it was coming from far away, or like it was trying to sneak up on me. Emily. I remember the first time I heard it. I thought it was just my imagination, but the second time, it was too clear. I froze. My heart stopped, and I swear my whole body went cold. I looked at Matt, still sleeping beside me, completely unaware. But it wasn't him. It wasn't even close. Emily. I sat up in bed, my pulse racing. I couldn't move. I just kept staring at the monitor, praying it was some kind of glitch, a malfunction. But the voice came again, clearer this time. Emily, so small, so innocent. Each night the whispers came, and each time they grew a little louder, a little clearer. It wasn't just her name anymore. They started to talk. About us. About her. How could they know? I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, that it was just interference, but deep down I knew I wasn't hearing things. The whispers were alive. They think they can protect her, one voice hissed, low and slow, like it was savoring the words. But they can't. Not from us. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I tried to turn the monitor off, but the static was louder now, like the voices were getting closer. The air around me felt thick, suffocating, like the walls were closing in. They still haven't figured it out, another voice said. They don't realize that their daughter isn't the one they should be afraid of. I felt my blood run cold. They were talking about us, talking about things they had no right to know. How could they? How could they know things that we never even said out loud? It was like they had been watching us the whole time, waiting for something. But waiting for what? I didn't know how much longer I could take it. I wanted to scream, to wake Matt, but I couldn't. I was frozen, my body betraying me, stuck in the darkness, listening to the voices grow louder and louder with each passing night. The next evening, I went into Emily's nursery, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. She was asleep like always, her little body curled up under the blanket. But as I stood there looking at her, I couldn't help but feel watched. And then I heard it again. "This is just the beginning," one voice whispered, so close I could almost feel it on my skin. "They think they're safe here, but they're not. They never were." I rushed out of the room, my head spinning. I could feel the temperature dropping, the air growing colder around me, like something was moving just out of sight. That night, the voices weren't just whispers anymore. They were full conversations. I could hear them discussing everything. The house, United States, the things we thought we'd left behind. They knew about our past, things we'd never told anyone, things we barely even spoke about to each other. They thought they could escape, one voice said, calm and detached. But the past always catches up, and now they're ours. My heart hammered in my chest. They were watching us. They had always been watching us. They knew our fears, our weaknesses. They knew what made us tick. And the worst part, they were starting to get closer. Every night the whispers shifted. It was no longer just about Emily. It was about me and Matt, too. It was like they were studying us, dissecting us, preparing for something. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel it, deep down. I wasn't sure if I was going crazy, but the whispers, they were so real. I went into the nursery again, trembling, hoping that somehow this time it would be okay. But when I opened the door, I saw her. Emily was lying in her crib, her tiny hands curled up into fists, her eyes wide open. Not blinking, just staring straight ahead. And it wasn't at me. It wasn't at anything in the room. She was staring into the darkness, her mouth curled into a faint, unsettling smile. I walked toward her, my breath shallow, trying to get closer without making a sound. And that's when I heard it. Another whisper, so clear it felt like it was right behind me. She's already ours. I froze. My entire body went cold. No, she wasn't smiling at me. She wasn't smiling at anything in the room. She was smiling at them. I backed away from her crib, the room spinning around me. I wanted to scream, to wake Matt, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't make him understand. How could I? How could I make him believe that someone was watching our daughter? That our baby monitor was speaking to us, whispering to her? I grabbed the monitor, my hands shaking violently, and as I looked down at the screen, my blood ran cold. The static was gone. In its place was a dark, flickering image, and in the shadows behind Emily's crib, I saw them. Figures, tall, twisted shapes, hovering around her, their long, spindly arms stretched out toward her. They weren't human. They didn't even look like anything from this world. Their faces were distorted, obscured in darkness, but their eyes were staring straight at me. The whispers started again, louder this time. She's ours. She's always been ours. I dropped the monitor. The room fell silent, but I could still feel them. I could feel their presence. Watching, waiting. I ran out of the room, but I could feel their eyes on me. I could feel them getting closer, and I knew, deep in my bones, that they weren't finished. Not yet. They were just getting started. I don't know when the feeling first started, but by that night it was all-consuming. The house felt different, heavy, suffocating even. I lay in bed, staring into the dark, trying to ignore the rising panic in my chest, the whispers, the giggles, the coldness that seemed to creep under the doorframe every time we closed it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, something not human, and I was terrified that Emily was in the middle of it. Matt was asleep beside me, his steady breathing almost lulling me into a false sense of comfort. But I knew better by now. There was no comfort to be found here. The baby monitor sat on the nightstand, its green light blinking, a soft hum filling the otherwise quiet room. I told myself it was just the usual static, that nothing had changed. But even as I thought it, a chill ran down my spine, an invisible hand gripping my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. And then I heard it. A giggle. It wasn't Emily, not this time. I froze, the sound so sharp, so clear, that it took a moment for my brain to process it. The sound of a child's laughter, but not her laughter. It was too high-pitched, too innocent, but somehow wrong at the same time. I glanced at Matt, but he was still deep in sleep, unaware of the terror creeping up the walls of our home. I could hear the giggling again, and this time it sounded closer. It was coming from the baby monitor, the very same monitor we had set up just days ago to keep an eye on Emily. I sat up quickly, my heartbeat racing, the blood pounding in my ears. I couldn't understand what I was hearing. I couldn't explain it. It felt wrong, too real. It was as if something, was in the room with us. "Matt," I whispered, shaking him gently. My voice trembled, barely escaping my throat. "Matt, wake up. Something's wrong." He stirred, his eyes barely opening. "What is it, Sarah?" "Listen," I said, my voice too tight to be convincing. "Listen to the monitor." Matt blinked, still half asleep, his eyes going to the glowing green light of the monitor. He heard it then, the giggle. He didn't need to be convinced anymore. "What the hell?" he muttered, rubbing his eyes. He sat up, now fully awake. The giggling, soft and playful, echoed through the speaker, sending chills down my spine. But the thing was, it wasn't just the laughter, it was the way it sounded. As if it wasn't coming from Emily at all. It was coming from somewhere else. I could feel my heart race in my chest. "It's not her," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. "She's not laughing like that." Matt frowned, still staring at the monitor, his face pale. That's not right." The giggling continued, then stopped suddenly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The silence was worse than the giggling. I didn't want to look at the monitor, didn't want to know what was coming next. But then, through the static, I heard it. It wasn't laughter anymore, it was a voice. "Come play with me, Emily." I could feel my blood run cold. The voice was soft, innocent even, but there was something in it that chilled me to the bone. My legs shook as I stood up, not sure whether to run to Emily's room or stay where I was, but I had to check. I had to know what was happening. I motioned to Matt to follow me, and we both silently crept down the hall. The air around me felt thick, like we were moving through water. The hallway stretched in front of us, each step heavier than the last. I felt like I was walking into a trap. When we reached Emily's nursery, I reached for the doorknob, the cold metal sending a shock through my hand. I hesitated, pressing my ear against the door. Silence, no giggles, no whispers, nothing. But the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it deepened, pulling me into a pit of dread I couldn't escape. I slowly pushed the door open, my eyes immediately scanning the room. There she was, in her crib, curled up under her blanket, just like before. But something was off. Something was wrong. Emily wasn't asleep. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the baby monitor. Not at me, not at anything in the room. She was staring straight at the monitor, her little face expressionless, her lips stretched into a smile. But it wasn't the sweet, innocent smile I'd seen 100 times before. No, this smile, it was too wide, too knowing, like she wasn't even her anymore. I froze. My body refused to move, my breath caught in my throat. "Emily," Matt said, his voice a whisper, almost afraid to disturb whatever was happening. She didn't respond, she just kept staring at the monitor, her eyes unblinking. That's when I heard it again. The giggle. It was coming from her this time, but it wasn't right. Her mouth didn't move, but the sound came, sharp, clear, echoing through the room like it was coming from the walls themselves. And that's when I realized. She wasn't smiling at me. She wasn't smiling at anything in the room. She was smiling at something. Someone. The giggle came again, and I felt my knees go weak. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet as the blood drained from my face. I reached for Matt, but he wasn't moving either. He just stood there, his gaze locked onto Emily, his face pale and terrified. Then the room went cold. A chill so deep, so unnatural, that it seemed to freeze everything around us. The monitor began to flicker. At first, I thought it was just the usual static, the kind you get when the signal cuts out. But this time, it was different. The screen showed nothing but dark, swirling shapes, moving just behind Emily's crib, long shadows reaching toward her. I blinked, my eyes stinging with panic, and as I tried to focus, a figure appeared. It was huge, dark, and blurred, its edges indistinct, like it was made of smoke. But I could see its eyes. They were locked onto me, into us. And I knew, without a doubt, that whatever it wasn't supposed to be here. Before I could even move, the figure flickered again, disappearing into the static, leaving only the haunting, high-pitched giggle behind. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't take my eyes off Emily. And then, from the monitor, the voice whispered one last time, "She's ours now." And that's when I understood. It wasn't just the house that was watching us. It wasn't just the voices on the monitor. It was them. And they weren't going to stop. not until they took everything. The silence in the house was unlike anything I had ever felt before. Unnaturally quiet, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. A suffocating weight pressed down on me as I stepped into the nursery, the chill in the air wrapping around my bones, sending a shiver through me that I couldn't shake. My heart hammered in my chest, the sound of it deafening in my ears. Where was Emily? I hadn't imagined it, had I? I looked around the room, my breath catching in my throat. The crib was empty. I rushed to the side of the crib, my hands trembling as I pushed the blanket aside. There was no sign of her, no soft rise and fall of her tiny chest, no baby coo, nothing. Just the emptiness, the cold, hollow emptiness of the room. "Matt," I whispered, my voice shaking. I turned to him, my hands desperately clutching the crib's railing. "Matt, where is she?" Matt's face was pale, his eyes wide as they scanned the room, looking as if they were searching for some explanation, some way to make sense of this. But there was nothing. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but no words came out. The fear was there, deep, raw, and unmistakable. "Where is she?" I repeated, the words leaving my mouth in a near panic. She can't have just disappeared. I grabbed Matt's arm, trying to steady myself, but it was like my feet were made of lead, heavy and unyielding. The room felt wrong, empty. The air was thick, like it was pressing down on us from every angle. That's when I saw it. The baby monitor. The green light was still flickering, but something about it made my stomach drop. It was too still, too quiet. I glanced at Matt, hoping he'd feel it too, but he was already moving toward the nightstand. His eyes never left the monitor. I could hear his shallow breath as he reached for it, his hands trembling almost as much as mine. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. My pulse raced as Matt adjusted the monitor, and that's when the image changed. I could see her, or at least I thought I could. It was Emily, but not Emily. Her face was distorted, twisted into something that looked wrong. Her eyes were wide, but there was no life in them, just dark, empty sockets. And that grin, it stretched across her face like something from a nightmare, too wide, too knowing. I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. "No," I whispered. "No, that's not her. That's not Emily." But it was, and it wasn't. The giggle, that giggle, came again, soft and unnervingly high-pitched. But it wasn't coming from her. No, it came from somewhere else, from something else. It filled the air like a mocking whisper, echoing through the room and sending chills down my spine. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. The room wasn't just cold, it was freezing, like winter had come inside, and the air itself was alive with something dark, something hungry. Matt's eyes were wide, locked onto the monitor. He didn't speak. He couldn't. His face was as pale as the walls around us, his jaw clenched tight as he stared at the screen. I wanted to scream, to demand that he say something, anything, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It was like the air had thickened, blocking the words in my throat, suffocating me. The figures were there now, standing behind her. Not with her, holding her. They weren't human. Their forms were twisted, unnatural. Long, skeletal limbs stretched unnaturally toward her, gripping her like something they owned. The monitor flickered again, the image distorting like a broken screen, but I could still see them. The shadows. Their long, dark fingers wrapped around Emily's tiny body, their features shifting in and out of the static. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the monitor off the stand and throw it out the window, but my body refused to move. It was like I was frozen in place, unable to look away from the horrific sight. They took her," Matt whispered, barely audible, his voice distant, as if he was already slipping into some place I couldn't follow. The monitor flickered again, the image distorting so violently that I thought the screen would crack. And then, everything went black. No more giggles, no more whispers, no more Emily. It was gone. The darkness on the screen was like the darkness in my chest. An empty void, pulling everything in, consuming everything. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think. The cold in the room was unbearable now, and I reached for Matt, trying to pull him toward me, but my fingers barely brushed against his arm. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were wide, locked onto the blackness in front of us, as if he had already seen the truth. "Matt," I gasped, but the words barely escaped me. "Where did she go?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned slowly toward me, his face ashen, his lips trembling. "She's gone," he whispered, his voice breaking. "They took her. They took her." The air seemed to drain from the room as those words hung between us, hanging in the suffocating silence. Gone. I couldn't understand it. How could she just be gone? How could the monitor show us those things? I looked back at the crib. Empty, silent, there was nothing. No movement. No sign that she had ever been there. That's when it hit me. The house, the whispers, the giggles. It wasn't just the house anymore, it wasn't just some creepy old building, it had taken her. I stepped backward, my body trembling uncontrollably as the realization sank in. We had been wrong all along. It wasn't the house we had to fear, it was them, the things that had been watching us, waiting for us to let our guard down. They were here, and they weren't leaving. I never imagined I'd find myself in this position. Standing in the nursery, watching the shadows writhe in every corner of the room, waiting for something to happen, waiting for me to face it. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt like it had thickened, like the very walls were closing in on me. The house, this house, had already taken everything from us. And now it was going to take the last thing I had left. I could hear Matt's breathing from behind me, shallow and broken, but I didn't turn to look at him. There was no point. He wasn't the one I had to face. I had to face whatever was lurking in the dark, whatever had been watching us all along, whatever had taken Emily. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, seeping into my skin. The darkness in the room wasn't just the absence of light, it was alive. It was pulsing, like it had a heartbeat, an agenda. And as I took that first step into the room, my legs felt like they were made of lead. Every move was slow, deliberate, as though the house itself was drawing me in, pulling me closer to the center of this nightmare. I kept my eyes on the crib, though it was empty now, emptier than I could ever have imagined. It was just a cradle, just wood. But it felt like a tomb. I moved closer, each step causing the floorboards to creak under my weight. My chest was tight, my breathing labored, but I couldn't stop, I couldn't turn away. "Emily," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Emily, please." Nothing, no giggles, no cries, nothing. The darkness in the corners of the room seemed to move, to shift. The air grew colder, so much colder, like the temperature had dropped in an instant, as though the house itself was exhaling a frozen breath. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't just the shadows shifting anymore. Something was there, something moving. A figure. I could barely make it out at first, just a silhouette in the darkness. But as it became clearer, the terror in my chest exploded into full, paralyzing fear. The figure was huge, towering above me like some grotesque thing that had no business being in this world. Its shape was distorted, stretched impossibly tall, its limbs thin and long, like twisted branches reaching for something I couldn't see. And then, its head. It didn't have a face. Not really, but I could feel its eyes, even though there were no eyes. It was as if it was staring right into my soul, watching my every move. The emptiness where its face should have been was more terrifying than any form I could imagine. And as it moved closer, I felt the pull of it, the force of its presence, as though the air itself was being sucked into its void. "Emily," I whispered again, my voice breaking under the weight of the dread pressing against my chest. The figure didn't respond. It didn't need to. It was waiting for me to understand, to realize, and that's when it happened. From the darkness, I saw her. Emily, but it wasn't her, not the way she was before. No, she was floating in the air, her small body suspended above the crib like some macabre puppet. Her arms hung limp, her legs dangling, but her eyes, those hollow eyes, were wide open, fixed on something I couldn't see. My heart stopped. My blood froze in my veins. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. "Emily," I croaked again, reaching out toward her, but the darkness, the figure, seemed to pull me back. I couldn't move. My legs were frozen in place. My body felt paralyzed, like the house itself was holding me there, preventing me from doing anything to save her. Her little body twitched, but there was no cry, no movement that I could recognize. It was like she was empty, like she was no longer the Emily I knew, the one I loved, the one I was losing. Then the giggle. It wasn't a giggle anymore, it was a mocking laugh. Not from Emily, but from it. The thing that had taken her, that had filled her with this emptiness. The sound echoed through the room like it was coming from all around me. I felt like the very walls were laughing at me, laughing at my helplessness. "No," I whispered, my voice a desperate plea. "No!" I tried to take another step forward, but the air around me seemed to thicken, to hold me back. The figure, the shadow, stepped forward, its limbs stretching further into the room. Its presence grew, expanding, suffocating. I could feel its coldness wrapping around me, drowning me in it. And then, Emily. She moved, but not the way I expected. She didn't reach for me. She didn't cry for help. No, she turned her head, slowly, impossibly slowly, and for the first time, I saw her eyes, empty, hollow. And she smiled. It wasn't the smile of my daughter. It wasn't a smile I could recognize. It was a grin, wide, unnatural, twisted. She wasn't her anymore. She was something else, something wrong. And that's when I realized it wasn't about Emily anymore. The voice echoed again, louder this time, coming from everywhere and nowhere. The shadow seemed to absorb the sound, growing darker, closer. "You're too late," it whispered, so softly I could barely hear it over the pounding in my chest. "She's ours now." And then the shadows moved, pulling her away, dragging her into the dark with them. I reached out, my body moving against its will, but it was too late. They were already gone, and I was left standing there, in the dark, with nothing. No more whispers, no more giggles, just the suffocating silence that followed. And as the room fell still, as the shadows dissolved into nothing, I realized one terrifying truth. I wasn't just losing her. I had already lost. Thank you for venturing into the shadows with me here at Frightful Whispers. Remember, the darkness holds secrets, but also whispers truths to those who dare to listen. If tonight's tale sent shivers down your spine, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep the fire of fright alive. Rest easy, but keep one eye open, for the night is never truly still. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, stay curious, and let the whispers guide you.